They cut a veteran Navy SEAL out of the will and left him with nothing but a forgotten cabin by the lake. But what no one knew, his dog had already been there before. When he arrived, something felt wrong, like the place wasn't abandoned, just waiting. And the deeper he went, the more he realized. This wasn't an accident. It was a test. One that could expose the truth his family tried to hide. And the only one who seemed to understand it was his dog. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Veteran Dog Stories. The church stood quiet among the northern pines, its stone walls dusted with a thin layer of snow that softened every edge, as if the world itself had decided to speak more gently that morning. Sunlight filtered through stained glass windows in pale fragments, blue, gold, and muted red, falling across the wooden pews like memories that refused to settle. Rowan Hale stood in the back. He always stood in the back. At 43, he carried himself like a man who had long ago learned not to take up more space than necessary. He was tall, just over 6 feet, broad-shouldered with the solid, disciplined build of someone shaped by years of special operations. Nothing about him was soft. His jaw was sharp, his face weathered by sun and wind, his skin lightly tanned from time spent outdoors. A short, rough stubble traced his jawline, not careless, just practical. His dark brown hair was cut short in a military style, already touched with silver at the temples, a quiet reminder that time didn't slow down for anyone. His eyes, blue-gray, deep and steady, didn't move much. They didn't need to. They had seen enough. Rowan wore the same clothes he wore most days, an olive field jacket faded at the seams, a red and dark blue plaid shirt beneath it, dark cargo pants, and worn brown leather boots that had carried him through more places than most men would ever see. On his wrist, an old military watch ticked with quiet precision, scratched but unyielding. At his feet lay Ash. The German Shepherd was not simply a dog. At 5, maybe 6 years old, Ash held himself like a trained soldier. His coat, black along the spine, blending into warm tan along his chest and legs, was thick, healthy, built for cold climates. His posture was calm but alert, ears slightly forward, eyes constantly moving. He didn't fidget. He didn't whine. He observed. If Rowan was a man who had learned silence, Ash was the creature who understood it. At the front of the church rested the coffin. Evelyn Mercer. For nearly 20 years, Rowan had lived in her world, quietly, carefully, like someone who knew he had been invited in, but never fully belonged. He had repaired her house when pipes burst in winter. He had rebuilt the porch steps when they cracked under ice. He had driven her to doctor appointments, waited in cold parking lots, stayed awake through long nights when she couldn't sleep. He had been there, always. But presence, he had learned, was not the same as being seen. In the first row sat Evelyn's family. Victor Kane was the first thing people noticed. He was in his early 50s, tall and lean with a posture that suggested control rather than strength. His face was narrow, his features sharp, his dark hair carefully styled, even for a funeral. His charcoal coat was expensive, perfectly tailored, the kind of clothing that didn't wrinkle no matter how long it was worn. His eyes were cold, not cruel exactly, but calculating, like a man who saw the world in terms of advantage. Beside him sat Marissa Vale. She was in her mid-30s, composed in a way that felt almost rehearsed. Tall, pale, with sleek blonde hair pulled into a precise knot at the back of her head. Her black coat fit her like armor. Clean lines, deliberate, elegant. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and distant. She didn't look at Rowan. Not once. She didn't need to. In her world, he had already been measured and dismissed. The pastor's voice carried gently through the church, speaking of kindness, of memory, of legacy. Rowan listened. But the words didn't land. Grief, for him, wasn't loud. It didn't come with tears or shaking hands. It came as something quieter, a space where something used to be and wasn't anymore. When the service ended, people stood. Voices softened. Hands shook. Condolences were exchanged in careful tones. Rowan didn't move right away. Ash stood first. The dog stretched slowly, then looked up at Rowan. Not impatient, not questioning, just waiting. Rowan nodded once. They left without saying a word. A week later, Rowan sat in a polished office in downtown Briar Glen. The building smelled faintly of leather and paper, old money and older decisions. The man behind the desk was Gideon Pike, a lawyer in his early 70s. He was thin, almost fragile-looking at first glance, but his eyes betrayed a sharper edge. Silver hair combed neatly back, glasses resting low on his nose. He had the kind of presence that didn't demand attention, but held it anyway. He had known Evelyn for decades. And today, he looked tired. Rowan sat across from him, posture straight, hands resting loosely on his knees. Ash lay beside the chair, head low but eyes alert, tracking every movement in the room. Victor and Marissa sat opposite. Victor leaned back comfortably, fingers steepled, already at ease. Marissa had one leg crossed over the other, her attention drifting between the room and her phone. Neither of them looked concerned. Why would they be? Gideon opened the folder. "The last will and testament of Evelyn Mercer," he began. His voice was steady, practiced. The reading went quickly. The house, valued at over $2 million, went to Marissa. Investment accounts, retirement funds, heirlooms, all distributed with careful precision. Victor received antiques and partial control over certain financial holdings. Rowan's name did not come up. Not once. He sat still. He had expected something like this, not because Evelyn didn't care, but because he had never fit into the world those documents were written for. Still, expectation didn't soften impact. It just delayed it. Gideon paused near the end. "There is one final provision," he said. Victor shifted slightly, interested now. Marissa looked up. Gideon cleared his throat and read, "To Rowan Hale, I leave the property known as White Pine Lodge." Silence followed. Victor let out a quiet breath that might have been a laugh. Marissa tilted her head slightly, lips curving in something faintly amused. "A cabin?" she said. "That's thoughtful," Victor added, his tone smooth. "Evelyn always did appreciate simplicity." Rowan said nothing. But then Gideon continued. "My husband has lived comfortably and securely during our years together," he read, "and has never lacked for stability. Therefore, I believe this final gift is sufficient." Something shifted. Not outside, inside. Rowan didn't react outwardly. His face remained still, his posture unchanged. But the words moved through him slowly, like cold water seeping through cracks. Comfortable, secure, sufficient. He understood what that meant. He hadn't been forgotten. He had been summarized, reduced to something manageable, something small enough to fit neatly into a final paragraph. For a brief moment, something sharp rose in his chest, not anger, not even sadness, something closer to absence, like realizing a part of your life had never been real in the way you believed it was. Gideon slid a small envelope across the table. Inside was a single iron key. Ash stood. No one had given him a command. The German shepherd stepped forward, silent, controlled. His nose lowered toward the envelope. He sniffed once. Then again. His ears twitched. Something had caught his attention. Victor sighed lightly. Is that really necessary? Marissa barely looked up. Rowan didn't move. Ash lifted his head slightly. Then, tap, tap, tap. 3 firm knocks of his paw against the hardwood floor. The sound echoed softly in the room, and everything stopped. It wasn't the sound itself. It was the stillness that followed. Ash didn't look at Rowan. He looked at the envelope. Not curious, not playful. Focused. Like he had just recognized something. Older than the room, older than the moment itself. For a second, just one, Rowan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not grief, not anger. Recognition. Like a door inside him, one he hadn't realized was closed, had just shifted. Marissa rolled her eyes, breaking the silence. "It's a key," she said. "Not a revelation." Victor stood, adjusting his coat. "Well," he said lightly, "I suppose we should be grateful she left him something at all." Rowan finally reached for the envelope. His hand was steady, but not empty anymore. Ash stepped back beside him, his body settling into stillness once again. Watching. Waiting. The meeting ended quickly after that. Victor and Marissa left first. Gideon lingered a moment. His eyes rested on Rowan, not with pity, but something closer to quiet understanding. "She was careful," he said softly. Rowan met his gaze. "I'm starting to see that." Outside, the air was cold, clean, the kind of cold that cleared your head whether you wanted it to or not. Rowan stood beside his truck for a long moment, the envelope in his hand. The key inside felt heavier than it should have. Ash jumped into the passenger seat, turning once before settling. Rowan opened the door, sat down. The engine started with a low rumble. For a while he didn't move. In the rearview mirror, the town looked small, distant, like something already behind him. He glanced at Ash. The dog was watching the road ahead. Not back, not sideways, forward. Rowan rested his hand on the steering wheel. Then slowly, he shifted into gear. The truck rolled forward. Snow crunched beneath the tires, and somewhere deep inside him, not hope, not yet, but something quieter, had begun to wake. The road narrowed long before Rowan realized it. What had once been a proper highway slowly gave way to thinner pavement, then cracked asphalt, and finally, a winding stretch of dirt packed hard by years of weather and the occasional passing truck. Pines grew closer on both sides, tall and silent, their branches holding the last traces of snow like quiet witnesses to something older than memory. Rowan drove without turning on the radio. He preferred it that way. Silence wasn't empty to him. It was information. Wind moving through branches, the low hum of the engine, the faint shift of Ash adjusting his weight in the passenger seat. All of it meant something, even if he didn't consciously name it. Ash hadn't slept. Not really. The German shepherd sat upright, head slightly forward, ears tuned to something beyond the truck. His amber-brown eyes remained fixed ahead, tracking the road not like a passenger, but like a guide. Rowan noticed it. He didn't say anything, but he noticed. The forest here felt different, not darker, not threatening, just deliberate, like every tree had chosen its place and stayed there long enough to forget anything else. He adjusted his grip on the steering wheel. For a brief moment, something flickered through his mind. A memory. Evelyn standing by the kitchen window one evening, her reflection faint in the glass. Ash sitting beside her, calm, still. Rowan had asked where she'd gone that week, another one of her quiet trips north. She hadn't turned around. Just somewhere quiet, she'd said. He hadn't pushed. Now, driving deeper into that same direction, Rowan realized something that settled slowly into his chest. She had never said where. The first sign of Briar Glen wasn't a building. It was a mailbox. Old, slightly tilted, with peeling green paint and a number half worn away by weather. It stood at the edge of the road like a marker between worlds. Then came the town. It appeared gradually, as if it didn't want to interrupt the forest too abruptly. A handful of wooden buildings lined a narrow main street. A gas station with 2 pumps, paint-chipped but functional. A general store with a faded sign that had once been bright red. A small diner with fogged windows and a flickering neon light that hummed faintly even in daylight. It wasn't abandoned, but it wasn't thriving either. It was surviving. Rowan slowed the truck as he drove through. A few people looked up, not suspicious, not welcoming. Just curious. The kind of curiosity reserved for something unfamiliar that might matter later. Outside the general store stood an older man sweeping snow off the wooden steps. He was tall but slightly bent at the shoulders, like time had pressed down on him without breaking him. His beard was thick and white, trimmed unevenly, and his face carried deep lines etched by years of wind and work. His coat was heavy canvas, stained with sawdust and oil. His eyes, though, sharp, clear blue, the kind that didn't miss much. He paused mid-sweep as Rowan's truck rolled by. Their eyes met for half a second. The man gave a slow nod, not a greeting, recognition, without context. Rowan nodded back before he could think about it. Ash turned his head slightly, watching the man until he disappeared behind the truck. Then he faced forward again. Still focused. Still certain. White Pine Lodge didn't reveal itself all at once. The road curved once more, then dipped slightly, and the trees parted just enough for the structure to come into view. Rowan eased off the gas. The cabin stood about 50 yards from the river, built from gray stone and dark timber. Its roof sloped sharply, designed to shed heavy snow, and 2 wide windows faced the water, catching the pale afternoon light. The structure wasn't new, but it wasn't collapsing either. It held itself with quiet strength, like something that had been built to last rather than impress. Behind it, slightly off to the side, stood a long wooden building. The boathouse. Its cedar planks had weathered to a soft silver gray, the double doors closed, but intact. The frame leaned just enough to show age, but not neglect. Rowan turned off the engine. For a moment he didn't move. He had expected something forgotten, something broken. Instead he found something, waiting. Ash didn't wait. The dog jumped down from the truck and landed lightly on the snow-covered ground. His paws made almost no sound as he began moving, not running, not circling wildly. Walking. Purposefully. He passed the front porch without hesitation, sniffed once at the edge of the steps, then continued around the side of the cabin. His tail stayed level, his posture steady, his nose low. Rowan stepped out slowly, closing the truck door behind him. Cold air filled his lungs. It felt cleaner than the air he'd left behind. Not just physically, something else. He followed Ash. The German Shepherd moved along the edge of the house, pausing briefly at a window before continuing toward the back. He didn't scratch, didn't bark, just checked, like he already knew what he would find. Rowan noticed something else then. There were no broken boards, no shattered glass, no signs of abandonment. Someone had been here, not recently, but not long enough ago to let it fall apart. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of cedar and cold stone. Rowan stepped across the threshold, his boots echoing softly against the wooden floor. Dust rested lightly on surfaces, but not thick enough to suggest years of neglect. The room was simple. A stone fireplace, a worn leather couch, a wooden table positioned near the window overlooking the river. He moved slowly, observing. There was a cup hanging on a hook by the kitchen counter. Rowan stopped. The height, the placement. It was exactly where his hand would reach without thinking. He didn't touch it. He moved on. Near the corner of the room, a folded blanket rested neatly on a chair. Not decorative. Functional. Folded the way soldiers folded gear. Tight, efficient, precise. Rowan's chest tightened slightly. He hadn't shown Evelyn that method. Not directly. Which meant... He didn't finish the thought. Ash moved through the rooms, silent, focused. He entered each space briefly, sniffing low, tail moving slowly, not excitement, but recognition. Then he stopped. The back of the cabin, near the secondary kitchen space. He stood still. Rowan watched as Ash lowered his head. The dog inhaled slowly, deeply, as if pulling something out of the wood itself. Not a surface scent. Something older. Something that had settled deep into the grain. Ash's ears shifted forward. His body went still. Then, very slowly, he stepped to the left. Exactly 2 steps. He stopped again, looked down, and for the first time since arriving, Ash hesitated. Not uncertainty, not fear. Something else. Like a memory that didn't fully belong to him, but he was trying to reach it anyway. Rowan felt it. That same strange pull in his chest. Not logic, not reason, but something quieter. Something that said, this place didn't just exist before you arrived. It expected you. Ash lifted one paw. Not to strike. Not yet. He pressed it lightly against the floor, then pulled it back. Waiting. Rowan stepped closer. The wood beneath his boots felt solid until it didn't. There, a slight give, almost unnoticeable. He crouched down, running his fingers along the seam between 2 boards. The difference was subtle, but once felt, it couldn't be ignored. He exhaled slowly. Ash, he murmured. The dog sat back, watching him. Not excited, not impatient, just certain. Rowan pressed down. The board shifted slightly. Not enough to open, but enough to confirm. Something was there. Hidden. Deliberately. He didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he sat back on his heels. His eyes moved across the room again. The cup. The blanket. The positioning of everything. This wasn't a place Evelyn had owned. It was a place she had used. Lived in. Prepared. Rowan leaned back against the cabinet behind him, his hand resting unconsciously on his knee. For years he had believed something simple. That Evelyn had lived her life in that house. With him. But now he saw the edges of something else. Another life. One she had never shown him. Not because she didn't trust him, but because maybe she needed him to find it himself. Ash shifted slightly, lying down beside the spot on the floor, guarding it. Rowan looked down at the dog. For the first time since the funeral, he didn't feel like a man who had lost everything. He felt like a man who had just stepped into the beginning of something he didn't yet understand. Outside, the river moved quietly, unseen, uninterrupted. And inside the cabin, something long buried was waiting to be uncovered. Rowan didn't open this floorboard immediately. He sat there for a long moment, crouched beside the hidden seam, his fingers still resting against the wood as if it might disappear if he moved too quickly. The cabin was quiet around him. The kind of quiet that didn't feel empty anymore. It felt occupied by something he couldn't name. Ash lay beside him, head resting low but eyes alert, waiting. Rowan exhaled slowly, then slid his fingers beneath the loosened plank and lifted. The board came up with a soft resistance, wood shifting against wood, revealing a narrow hollow beneath. Inside lay a cylindrical metal tube, dull silver, about the length of his forearm. It was sealed tightly at both ends with thick rubber rings, designed to keep out water, dirt, time. He lifted it carefully. It had weight. Not much, but enough to matter. Ash stood as soon as the tube cleared the floor, stepping closer, his nose brushing lightly against the metal surface. He inhaled once, then stepped back again, as if confirming something rather than discovering it. Rowan turned the cap slowly. The seal released with a soft, controlled click. Inside, 3 items rested snugly against one another. A small brass key, a folded piece of paper, hand-drawn, by the look of it, and a note. Rowan unfolded the note first. The handwriting stopped him. Evelyn. There was no mistaking it. Thin, precise. Each letter carefully formed as if written by someone who measured not just words, but the space between them. He read it once, then again. Ash will take you to the rest. Rowan stared at the words. Not find, not look, not if. There was no uncertainty in the sentence. It wasn't a suggestion. It was instruction. He sat back slowly, the paper still in his hand. A memory surfaced, uninvited. A late afternoon years ago, sunlight spilling across the yard behind Evelyn's house. Ash younger then, still growing into his size, Evelyn standing a few yards away, holding something small in her hand. Rowan had watched from the porch. She hadn't been giving commands the way handlers usually did. No sharp tones, no repetition. Instead, she had been patient, deliberate. She would place an object somewhere, hidden just enough, then step back. Ash would search, not frantically, but methodically. When he found it, she didn't reward him immediately. She would tap her foot, once, twice, 3 times. Rowan hadn't understood it then. He hadn't asked. Now, sitting on the floor of a cabin he had never known existed, the memory settled into place with quiet precision. Ash hadn't learned this here. He had been taught, prepared. Rowan unfolded the second item, the map. It was rough, drawn by hand, but detailed in a way that suggested familiarity rather than guesswork. The cabin was marked clearly. The river curved along one side, its bends sketched with confident lines. Behind the cabin, the outline of the boathouse appeared, along with a narrow path leading deeper into the trees. A small mark, just a square, sat near the back wall of the boathouse. Rowan looked up. Through the window, he could see the structure standing silent near the water. Ash had already turned toward it, not waiting this time, moving. The walk to the boathouse was short, but Rowan took it slowly. Snow crunched beneath his boots, each step deliberate. The air smelled faintly of pine and cold water, clean in a way that made everything else feel distant. The river flowed quietly beyond the trees, its surface broken only by slow-moving currents beneath a thin layer of ice. Ash reached the doors first. He didn't scratch, didn't push. He stood still, head slightly tilted, listening. Rowan stepped up beside him and grasped the handle. The wood was cold beneath his fingers, the metal latch stiff but intact. He pulled. The door opened with a low groan, wood shifting after years of minimal use. Inside, the air was different, heavier, filled with the scent of old timber, oil, and something faintly metallic. The space was larger than he expected. Wooden beams stretched overhead, solid despite their age. Dust floated in narrow beams of light cutting through high windows. Along the walls, tools hung in careful rows, chisels, clamps, hand planes, each placed with intention. Not abandoned. Paused. Rowan stepped inside, his boots echoing softly against the wooden floor. Ash moved ahead of him, his paws making almost no sound. He passed by the workbenches, sniffing briefly at each, his movements slow and focused. There was no urgency, only recognition. Rowan followed the line of tools along the wall. Some of them were older than the cabin itself. Others looked maintained, cleaned, preserved. Someone had been here, not recently, but not long enough ago to let it fall apart. Ash stopped. Not at the center of the room, not near the obvious places. He walked straight to the back wall. Third section from the left. He didn't hesitate, didn't circle, didn't search. He went directly to it. And then he sat. Slowly, deliberately. His eyes lifted to Rowan. For a brief second, something passed between them. Not command, not instinct. Something deeper. Like a memory shared across time. One that Rowan had never been present for, but was now part of anyway. Ash didn't move. He simply waited, as if the next step had never been his to take. Rowan approached. The wall looked solid, aged wood reinforced from behind. But once he stepped closer, he noticed something subtle, a seam, barely visible, running vertically between two panels. He reached out, pressing his palm against the surface. The wood felt slightly smoother in one section, worn differently, as if it had been touched more often than the rest. His fingers traced the edge. There, a small indentation. Not enough to see, just enough to feel. He pressed. A soft click echoed inside the wall. The panel shifted inward by less than an inch. Rowan paused. His heart didn't race. It slowed. That same controlled focus he had learned years ago, clearing the noise, narrowing the world to what mattered, settled into place. He pulled the panel open. Behind it lay a narrow compartment built directly into the frame. Inside were documents, several folders sealed in protective sleeves, a leather-bound file worn but intact, a stack of papers carefully wrapped to preserve them. Rowan reached in and removed the top folder. He opened it slowly. The first page was a legal document, typed, official. The title read, North Timber Passage Trust. Rowan's eyes moved across the page, scanning, processing. Dates, signatures, property descriptions. The document had been established over 12 years ago. Long before the last years of Evelyn's life. Long before any of this had touched him directly. He flipped through the pages. The scope widened with every sheet. Land parcels along the river, the cabin, the boathouse, sections of forest, access rights to old transport routes once used for timber and small watercraft. It wasn't just a property. It was a system, a structure designed to hold something together. Rowan turned to the final page. At the bottom, beneath a series of legal confirmations, one line stood alone. Primary beneficiary, Rowan Hale. He stared at it for a long time. The silence in the boathouse deepened, pressing in around him. He had spent years believing something simple, that he had been allowed into Evelyn's life, temporarily, conditionally, that he had been an addition, something that could be removed without consequence. But this wasn't an afterthought. This had been built, prepared, protected, for him. Rowan lowered the document slowly. His hand tightened slightly around the edge of the paper. Not anger, not confusion. Something else. Something unfamiliar. Ash shifted beside him, lying down at the base of the wall. Not guarding the documents. Not watching the door. Watching Rowan. Waiting. Rowan exhaled, a slow, controlled breath. He looked down at the German shepherd. You knew, he said quietly. Ash didn't move, didn't respond. But his eyes held steady, not answering, not denying, just present. Rowan leaned back against the wall, the documents resting loosely in his hands. For years he had thought he understood the shape of his life, where he stood, what he meant. Now, sitting in a place he had never seen, holding proof of something that had been set in motion long before he realized it. That shape was gone, replaced by something larger. Something he hadn't chosen, but had been chosen for. Outside, the river continued its slow movement through the forest. Unaware, unchanged. Inside, Rowan Hale sat in the quiet of a forgotten boathouse and understood, for the first time, that he had never been written out of the story. He had just been placed somewhere else. Morning came differently at White Pine Lodge. It wasn't loud. It didn't rush. It unfolded slowly, like the forest itself was waking up one breath at a time. Pale sunlight slipped through the tall windows, stretching across the wooden floor in long, quiet lines. Outside, the river moved beneath a thin crust of ice, its sound low and steady, like something thinking rather than flowing. Rowan Hale was already awake. He sat at the edge of the bed, boots on, elbows resting loosely on his knees, staring at nothing in particular. Sleep had come, but lightly. The kind that rested the body, but left the mind walking in circles. On the table beside him lay the documents. North Timber Passage Trust. He hadn't closed them. He hadn't put them away. It felt wrong to hide something that had been hidden for so long already. Ash lay near the door, stretched out but not fully relaxed. His ears flicked at small sounds, the wind against the roof, a branch shifting outside. When Rowan stood, Ash lifted his head immediately, watching him with quiet focus. "You coming?" Rowan said under his breath. Ash stood. Of course he was. The town looked different in daylight. Not brighter, just clearer. Rowan drove slowly down the main road, the truck tires crunching softly over packed snow. A few people were already moving, opening shops, clearing walkways, starting routines that didn't wait for anyone's story to settle. He parked near the small bakery. The bell above the door chimed softly as he stepped inside, bringing a gust of cold air with him. Warmth followed almost instantly, thick, comforting, filled with the scent of fresh bread, cinnamon, and something sweet baking in the back. Behind the counter stood a woman Rowan hadn't met before. She was in her late 60s, short but sturdy, with a round face softened by years of quiet kindness. Her gray hair was pulled back into a loose bun, a few strands escaping around her temples. Her eyes, light brown, almost golden in the morning light, held the kind of awareness that didn't come from curiosity, but from experience. "Mabel Quinn," she said before Rowan could speak, wiping her hands on a blue apron dusted with flour. Her voice was warm, steady, like she'd been expecting him long before he arrived. "You must be Rowan." He nodded once. Mabel studied him for a second, not rudely, not suspiciously, just measuring something deeper than appearance. "She waited," Mabel said softly, almost to herself. Then, louder, "Coffee?" Rowan hesitated, not because of the offer, because of the first sentence. "Who?" he asked, even though he already knew. Mabel gave a small smile. "Evelyn," she said, "that woman didn't do anything halfway." She poured the coffee without asking again, sliding the cup across the counter. Rowan took it, the heat settling into his hands in a way that felt grounding. Ash lay down near the door, watching the room. Not guarding. Just present. Mabel leaned her elbows lightly against the counter. "She didn't talk much about you," she said. "Not directly, but she talked enough." Rowan frowned slightly. "Enough for what?" Mabel's smile didn't change. "Enough for us to know you'd come." Later that morning, Rowan found the man he had seen the day before. Outside a long, low building near the edge of town, where stacks of old timber lay covered in snow, stood the same older man with the white beard. He was splitting wood with slow, deliberate swings of an axe. Each movement was controlled. Not fast, not weak. Just efficient. The kind of rhythm that came from decades of doing the same work. He paused when Rowan approached. Up close, the man looked older than Rowan had first thought. Early 70s, maybe. His beard was thicker than it had seemed from a distance, uneven, but clean. His hands were large, scarred, the knuckles worn from years of labor. "Calvin Rhodes," he said, planting the axe into a log and wiping his hands on his coat. His voice was rough but steady. "Rowan Hale." They shook hands. Calvin's grip was firm. Not a challenge. A confirmation. "You opened the place," Calvin said, nodding slightly toward the direction of the lodge. Rowan didn't ask how he knew. "You've been there," Rowan said instead. Calvin gave a quiet chuckle. "Been taking care of it longer than you think." Rowan's eyes narrowed slightly. "How long?" Calvin looked off toward the trees for a moment. 10 years, he said. Maybe a little more. That landed heavier than Rowan expected. "Evelyn hired you?" Calvin nodded. "Paid me every winter. Said the place needed to stay ready." He shrugged lightly. "Didn't ask questions." "Didn't need to." Rowan stood still. 10 years. That meant Evelyn had been building this, long before anything in their life had changed. "Why?" Rowan asked. Calvin looked back at him. "Guess you'll have to figure that out yourself," he said. Not evasive, just honest. Ash, who had been standing quietly at Rowan's side, suddenly moved. Not fast, but with purpose. He walked a few steps toward Calvin, then stopped. Calvin didn't flinch, didn't step back. Instead, he crouched slowly, lowering himself to Ash's level. For a moment, neither moved. Man and dog, studying each other. Then Calvin reached out, not to pet, not to command, just to offer his hand. Ash stepped forward, sniffed once, twice, and then he leaned his head just slightly into Calvin's palm. Rowan felt it immediately, that quiet shift. Ash didn't trust easily, not like that, not without reason. Calvin didn't smile, but his eyes softened. "She brought him here," he said quietly, almost as if remembering something he hadn't thought about in years. Rowan didn't speak, because now he knew. Ash hadn't just been trained. He had been brought back, again and again. Rowan met Lena Brooks just past noon. She arrived in a Forest Service truck, tires kicking up light snow as she pulled to a stop near the edge of the road. When she stepped out, she moved with a kind of confidence that came from knowing exactly where you were at all times. She was in her mid-30s, lean and strong, her posture balanced, alert. Her chestnut brown hair fell just past her shoulders, slightly wind-tangled, and her skin carried the faint tan of someone who spent more time outside than in. Her moss-green Ranger parka was worn, but well kept. Layered over a gray sweater and dark outdoor pants, her eyes were sharp, not unkind, just observant. "You're Hale," she said, walking up without hesitation. Rowan nodded. "Lena Brooks, Forest Service." He shook her hand. Her grip matched his, firm, direct. "No nonsense," she added. "Good, saves time." Rowan almost smiled. Almost. "You know about the land?" she asked. "I'm learning," he said. Lena glanced toward the trees. "That land isn't just property," she said. "People think it is. They're wrong." "How so?" She folded her arms. "That stretch along the river? It's the last intact corridor for miles. Old growth, natural flow. If someone cuts through it, the whole ecosystem shifts." Rowan listened, not just to the words, to the weight behind them. "And Evelyn?" he asked. Lena's gaze softened, just slightly. She understood that, she said, more than most people around here. Dylan Cross didn't arrive until late afternoon. He came walking, not driving, tall, early 30s, built like someone who had once been in peak condition and hadn't quite lost it, but hadn't fully held onto it either. His dark hair was cut short, uneven at the edges, and a faint scar ran along his jawline. His eyes were tired, not physically, but deeper than that. The kind of tired that didn't go away with sleep. He wore a worn brown jacket over a dark shirt, cargo pants faded at the knees, boots that had seen better days. He stopped a few feet from Rowan, didn't step closer, didn't speak right away. "You fixing the place?" he asked finally. Rowan nodded. "That's the idea." Dylan glanced past him, toward the direction of the lodge. "My dad used to work that shop," he said. "Before it shut down." Rowan waited. Dylan shrugged lightly. "Just thought I'd see if it was real." Rowan studied him, then said, "It is." Dylan nodded once, not convinced, but not dismissing it either. Ash watched him closely, not tense, not relaxed, evaluating. That night, Rowan sat alone at the table in the cabin. The letter lay open in front of him. Evelyn's handwriting moved across the page like a voice he had never fully heard when she was alive. "They will not let you keep this if they understand what it is." He read it again. "And you would not accept it if you did not find it yourself." Rowan leaned back in his chair, staring at the words. This wasn't about money. Not really. It was about something else. Something she had believed he could be. Or become. He exhaled slowly. For years he had thought he had been standing on the edge of someone else's life. Now, he realized he had been standing at the edge of something entirely different. Something that had been waiting. Ash lay near the door, watching him. Rowan looked over. Their eyes met. For the first time since arriving. Rowan didn't feel like a man who had been left behind. He felt like a man being asked. And he wasn't sure yet what the answer would be. But for the first time, he was willing to find out. The sound of tires on gravel reached Rowan before the engine did. It was late morning. The light had sharpened, cutting clean through the trees and reflecting off the river in fractured lines of white and silver. Rowan stood inside the boathouse, sleeves rolled just above his wrists, hands darkened with dust and old oil from sorting through tools that hadn't been used in years. Work helped, not because it solved anything, but because it gave shape to time. Ash lay near the open doorway, stretched across a patch of sunlight, his body still but not relaxed. His ears shifted slightly as the sound approached, subtle but immediate. Rowan didn't look up right away. He didn't need to. He knew. The engine cut off. A door opened. Then another. Silence followed, heavy, deliberate. Rowan wiped his hands on a cloth, then stepped out into the light. The black SUV stood in the clearing near the cabin. Victor Kane stepped out first. He looked exactly as Rowan remembered him. But something had changed. The sharp confidence was still there, the controlled posture, the clean lines of his charcoal coat. But now there was tension beneath it, subtle but present, like a crack beneath polished glass. Marissa Vale followed. Her movements were precise as always, but less fluid than before. Her eyes moved quickly across the property, the cabin, the boathouse, the tree line. Not admiring, not curious, assessing, calculating. The third door opened more slowly. Evan Vale stepped out. Rowan hadn't paid much attention to him before. Now he did. Evan was in his late 20s, maybe early 30s. Tall but slightly hunched, like he hadn't quite grown into his height. His dark hair was unkempt in a way that didn't feel intentional. and his face carried a kind of restless uncertainty. There were shadows under his eyes, lack of sleep or something deeper. Unlike Victor and Marissa, Evan didn't look at the property first. He looked at Rowan, then at Ash, and then down at the ground. Rowan stepped forward, stopping a few feet from the porch. He didn't speak. Victor adjusted his coat lightly, glancing around once more before settling his attention on Rowan. "Well," he said, voice smooth but tighter than before, "this is more than expected." Rowan said nothing. Marissa stepped closer, boots sinking slightly into the snow. "We underestimated it," she said plainly. "That won't happen again." There was no apology in her tone, only correction. Victor clasped his hands loosely behind his back. "We've reviewed some records," he continued. "Land valuations, historical access rights, timber roads." He paused, just long enough. "It seems Evelyn was more strategic than we realized." Rowan watched him, not reacting, just listening. Victor's eyes sharpened slightly. "So," he said, "we're here to discuss a fair resolution." Rowan's brow moved almost imperceptibly. "Fair," he repeated. Marissa stepped in. "The land, the structures, the river access, combined, it's worth far more than what was presented at the reading." She tilted her head slightly. "It would be unreasonable to assume one person should retain full control." Rowan let the silence stretch, then said, "You mean you want it?" Victor didn't smile. "We want to correct an imbalance." That was when Ash stood. The German shepherd moved forward in a straight line, placing himself between Rowan and the three visitors. His posture was not aggressive. No raised fur, no bared teeth, just stillness, solid, unmoving. His gaze moved slowly from Victor to Marissa, then to Evan. Evan shifted his weight slightly, almost stepping back before catching himself. Victor didn't move. He looked down at the dog, then back up at Rowan. "You might want to—" He didn't finish, because Ash didn't move, not an inch. Victor took one step forward, not aggressively, just enough to test the space. Ash lowered his head slightly, not in threat, in alignment. And then he lifted his paw, not striking, not yet. He brought it down once, a firm, controlled contact with the wooden step of the porch. The sound was not loud, but it carried. Something about it didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a mark, a line drawn, a boundary recognized before it was crossed. Evan's breath caught slightly. Rowan noticed. Victor paused. For the first time since arriving, he hesitated. Rowan stepped forward then, placing a hand lightly against Ash's shoulder. Not to move him, just to acknowledge him. "It's fine," Rowan said quietly. Ash didn't step aside. But he didn't move forward either. He held position. Rowan reached into the satchel slung over his shoulder and pulled out the documents. The folder was worn now, edges softened by use. He opened it calmly, flipping past the initial pages until he reached the core of it. "North Timber Passage Trust," Rowan said. Victor's eyes flickered. Marissa leaned slightly closer. Rowan turned the pages, laying them out across the small wooden table on the porch. "Established 12 years ago," he continued. "Assets transferred gradually. Protected under independent legal structure." Marissa's voice sharpened. "That doesn't change inheritance rights." Rowan looked at her. "It does if the assets weren't part of the estate." Silence. Victor stepped forward again, but slower this time. "Explain." Rowan tapped the final page. "Primary beneficiary designation," he said. Victor's eyes dropped, red, then narrowed. Marissa moved beside him, scanning quickly. Her expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. "That's," she started. Legally binding, Rowan finished. Victor straightened. That can be challenged. Rowan nodded once. It can. He closed the folder slowly, then looked directly at Victor. If you do, he said, every transaction tied to Evelyn's accounts gets reviewed. Marissa went still. Victor didn't respond. Not immediately. Rowan held his gaze. All of it, Rowan added. Every transfer, every account, every asset movement tied to the trust or the estate. Evan looked up sharply. Victor's jaw tightened. Marissa's fingers curled slightly at her side. They understood. Not just the legal risk, the exposure. Whatever they had assumed would be simple, wasn't. The silence stretched. Longer this time. Heavier. Victor exhaled slowly. This isn't over, he said. Rowan didn't answer. Marissa turned first, stepping back toward the SUV. Evan lingered for half a second longer. His eyes met Rowan's again. There was something there. Not resentment, not alliance. Something unfinished. Then he followed the others. The engine started. Gravel shifted beneath the tires as the vehicle turned and disappeared back down the narrow road. The forest swallowed the sound quickly. Rowan stood there for a while after they were gone. The air felt different. Not lighter, clearer. Ash stepped back beside him, lowering himself onto the porch, his body finally relaxing, just slightly. Rowan rested his hand against the dog's neck, warm, solid, real. They'll come back, Rowan said quietly. Ash didn't respond. He didn't need to. Rowan looked out toward the tree line, where the road curved out of sight. Victor's last words lingered. You won't keep this place. For a long time, Rowan had believed things like that. That some people were meant to hold on to things, and others weren't. That there were lines you didn't cross, roles you didn't outgrow, but standing there now, he didn't feel like the man they had dismissed in that office. He didn't feel like someone who had been left behind. He felt steady, grounded, like something had finally settled into place. Not because he had won anything, but because he had chosen not to step back. Rowan exhaled slowly, his eyes moving across the land, the cabin, the boathouse, the river beyond. It wasn't just property. Not anymore. It was something he understood in a way he hadn't before. Something built quietly, protected carefully, left deliberately. Ash shifted slightly beside him. Rowan glanced down. The dog's eyes were closed now, but not fully asleep. Just resting, trusting. Rowan nodded once, more to himself than anything else. Yeah, he said under his breath, this time. He didn't feel weak. The first week passed quietly. Not peacefully, quietly. There was a difference Rowan understood well. Peace was something earned. Quiet was just the absence of noise, and in that absence, things had a way of becoming louder. Doubt. Memory. The weight of decisions that couldn't be undone once made. Rowan chose to stay. That part had come easily. The harder part was everything that followed. The boathouse did not collapse overnight. It revealed its weaknesses slowly. The first problem came with the roof. Rowan noticed it early, light bleeding through thin seams where the wood had shifted over time. At first it looked manageable. Replace a few planks, reinforce the beams. Something he had done 100 times before. But once he climbed up, once he stepped onto the structure itself, the truth became clear. The central support beam had cracked, not visibly from below, but enough. Enough that another heavy snow would bring the entire section down. Rowan stood there for a long moment, boots balanced carefully on the aging wood, eyes scanning the line of the beam. He calculated automatically. Materials needed, time required, tools available. And then, What he didn't have: money, people, time. He climbed down slowly. Ash watched from below, head tilted slightly, tracking every movement. Rowan ran a hand across the back of his neck. "Not a quick fix," he muttered. Ash didn't react. He didn't need to. The second problem came 2 days later. The river thawed slightly under a brief stretch of warmer air, enough to loosen the ice near the edge. Rowan had decided to test one of the smaller boat frames left in the workshop. A half-finished structure that Calvin had mentioned had been started years ago. It wasn't complete, but Rowan needed to know what he was working with. Dylan had been there that morning. He had shown up without being asked, hands shoved into his jacket pockets, shoulders slightly hunched against the cold. "You're really doing this?" Dylan had said, not as a question. Rowan nodded. Dylan stepped inside, looking around the workshop again, slower this time. Not like someone checking if it was real, but like someone deciding if it mattered. "Need help?" he asked. Rowan didn't hesitate. "Yes." Dylan nodded once. That was enough. They worked in silence for most of the morning. Dylan was good with his hands, not refined, not precise in the way someone like Calvin might be, but capable. He moved with the memory of training, the kind that stayed in muscle long after purpose had faded. Rowan noticed the small things, the way Dylan paused before making certain cuts, the way his hands tightened slightly when tools slipped, the way his breathing changed, not from effort, but from something deeper, unsteady. By midday, they had carried the frame down toward the river. The current moved slowly, the water dark beneath patches of thinning ice. Rowan stepped forward first, guiding the structure carefully. "Easy," he said. Dylan followed. They lowered the frame into the water. For a second, it held. Balanced, floating. Then the left side shifted. A crack split through the wood, sharp, sudden. The frame collapsed inward, one side sinking as the other twisted out of alignment. Water rushed in. The structure folded into itself like something that had never been meant to hold weight in the first place. Dylan stepped back quickly. "Damn it," he muttered. Rowan didn't move. He watched the remains drift slightly before catching against the edge of the ice. Failure didn't surprise him, but it still landed. Dylan ran a hand through his hair, pacing once, twice. "I should have checked that joint," he said. "I saw it. It's not on you," Rowan said. Dylan shook his head. "That's not how it works." His voice tightened. Not anger, pressure. Rowan recognized it immediately. Dylan stepped back further, breathing uneven now. His hands trembled slightly. Not from cold, from memory. "I've seen this before," he said, voice lower now. "You think it'll hold? You tell yourself it will. And then—" He stopped. His eyes weren't on the river anymore. They were somewhere else. Somewhere far from the trees, the water, the present moment. Ash moved before Rowan could. The German shepherd stepped between them, not blocking, not confronting, interrupting, grounding. Ash didn't touch him, didn't bark. He simply stood there, close enough that Dylan couldn't ignore him. Dylan blinked, once, then again. His breathing slowed, just slightly. Ash held his position, silent, steady. After a few seconds, Dylan exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Sorry," he muttered. Rowan didn't respond right away. He didn't need to, because in that moment, he understood something. This wasn't just about rebuilding a structure. It was about rebuilding people who had forgotten how to stand without breaking. Dylan left early that day. Not abruptly, not angrily, just quietly. "I'll be back," he said, not quite meeting Rowan's eyes. Rowan nodded. He didn't ask when. The third problem came at night, not from the building, from Rowan himself. He sat alone at the table, the same place he had read Evelyn's letter days before. The fire had burned low, casting uneven light across the walls. Outside, the forest had settled into deep silence. Ash lay near the door, watching. Rowan leaned back in his chair, one hand resting against his temple. For years he had operated under clear rules: mission, objective, execution, success or failure. But this had no clear endpoint, no defined outcome, no guarantee. He looked down at his hands, rough, steady, capable, but for the first time in a long while, uncertain. "I don't know if this works," he said quietly. Not to Ash, not to the room, just out loud. The words felt strange, unfamiliar. Ash stood, walked over, then lowered himself beside Rowan's chair. He didn't look up, didn't nudge, didn't demand anything. He simply lay there, present. Rowan exhaled slowly. "You don't care if it works," he said. Ash remained still. Rowan looked down. There was something about the dog's calm that didn't feel passive. It felt intentional. Like the absence of panic was a choice, a decision. Not to react, but to remain. Rowan closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. "I've walked away before," he said, "when things didn't line up, when it didn't make sense." Ash shifted slightly. Then, once, he tapped his paw lightly against the wooden floor. Not sharp, not urgent, just there. A single quiet contact. Rowan froze, not because of the sound, because of what it meant. Not direction, not warning. Something simpler, something older. "Continue." Rowan sat there for a long time after that, thinking. Not about the past, not about Evelyn, not even about the trust, about the next step, just the next one. Not the whole path, just forward. The next morning, he started with the roof, no plan beyond what he could do with what he had. He cut new support braces from salvaged timber, measured twice, cut once, adjusted, reinforced. Slow work, precise work. The kind that didn't show progress immediately, but built something underneath. By midday, Dylan returned. He didn't say anything when he walked in, just picked up a tool, started working. Rowan didn't comment, didn't need to. By late afternoon, another figure appeared. A younger man this time, mid-20s, lean, with dark hair that fell into his eyes and hands that looked unused to heavy work. His jacket was too thin for the cold, his posture uncertain. "Luke Sanders," he said, standing near the entrance. "Heard you might need help." Rowan nodded. "Pick a task." Luke hesitated, then stepped forward, not confident, but willing. By evening, 3 people stood inside the boathouse. Not enough, but more than one. Ash lay near the center of the room, watching them all, not judging, not guiding, just present. Rowan stepped back, looking at the work they had done. It wasn't finished, not close, but it was something. More than yesterday, more than nothing. He rested his hands on his hips, exhaling slowly. For the first time since deciding to stay, he didn't feel like he was holding everything together alone. Not because the problems were gone, but because someone else had chosen to stand inside them with him. Ash lifted his head slightly, watching. Rowan met his gaze, then nodded once. This wasn't about fixing everything. Not yet. It was about not walking away. And for now, that was enough. A year did not arrive all at once. It moved quietly, like the river behind White Pine Lodge. Slow at first, then certain, reshaping everything it touched without asking permission. Winter broke into spring in thin fractures of melting ice, the river breathing again beneath the surface. The forest shifted from pale stillness to deep green, the pines shedding their silence for wind and birdsong. Summer came with long light and the steady rhythm of work. Autumn followed, golden sharp, reminding everyone that time did not wait. And through it all, the boathouse did not fall. It changed. By the time the next winter returned, the structure no longer looked like something forgotten. It looked used, alive. The roof held firm, reinforced with beams Rowan had cut and placed by hand. The doors opened cleanly now, no longer resisting with age. Inside, the workshop carried a different kind of weight. Not decay, but purpose. Tools no longer rested in silence. They moved. Dylan Cross stood near the central workbench, sleeves rolled, hands steady as he guided a plane across a length of cedar. His posture had changed over the months. Not entirely, but enough. The tension that once sat in his shoulders had eased, replaced by something quieter. Focus. He still had moments. Days when his hands paused too long, when his eyes drifted somewhere beyond the present. But he didn't leave anymore. He stayed. Luke Sanders worked across from him, measuring twice before each cut, his earlier hesitation replaced by careful determination. He was still learning, still unsure at times, but his movements carried intention now. He belonged to the work, even if he didn't fully realize it yet. Outside, the yard no longer sat empty. Footprints crossed the snow in multiple directions. Stacked timber rested under covered frames. A small row of finished pieces, oars, supports, partial hulls, lined one side of the building, waiting for the next stage. It wasn't a factory. It wasn't even efficient. But it was real. And in Briar Glen, that mattered more. The town had changed too. Not dramatically, not in ways that would make headlines or draw attention from outside, but enough. Enough that people noticed. The diner stayed open later now. The lights inside no longer flickered as often. The general store carried more supplies, not because business was booming, but because someone believed it might. And Mabel Quinn's bakery, it had never smelled richer. On certain mornings, Rowan would step inside and find more people than seats, hands wrapped around cups of coffee, voices low but present. They talked about small things, weather, repairs, work. But beneath it, something else had returned, expectation. That night, the town gathered by the river. The first winter gathering in years. No one called it a festival, not officially. But the lights strung along the edge of the water told a different story. Lanterns hung from posts and branches, casting warm gold against the cold blue of the snow. Fires burned in shallow pits, their glow pulling people closer together. Children moved along the edges of the ice, laughter cutting through the night air in brief, bright bursts. Rowan stood on the porch of White Pine Lodge, looking down at it all. He didn't join immediately. He observed, the way he always had. His posture remained the same, steady, controlled. But something in his expression had shifted, not softer, not exactly, lighter. The kind of light that didn't come from happiness, but from understanding. Behind him, the cabin stood warm, firelight flickering through the windows. Ahead, the town moved, alive. Ash stepped onto the porch beside him. The German Shepherd had changed too, but less visibly. His coat remained thick, his posture disciplined, his movements precise. But there was something in the way he carried himself now, less alert for danger, more aware of presence. He moved closer to Rowan and sat, not facing the town, facing him. Rowan glanced down. "You see it?" he asked quietly. Ash didn't move, but his eyes held steady. From the river below, a voice carried upward. "Rowan, He turned. It was Dylan, standing near the fire, one hand raised, the other holding a cup. Not calling for help, not asking for direction, just calling. Rowan hesitated. For a brief second, the old instinct surfaced. Stay back, observe. Don't step into something that could change. Ash stood, not moving toward the voice, moving toward Rowan. He stepped closer, just enough that his shoulder brushed lightly against Rowan's leg. Not pushing, not guiding, just present. Rowan exhaled, and in that moment, he understood something that had taken him a year to reach. He wasn't being asked to lead. He wasn't being asked to fix everything. He was being asked to stand where he was needed. Nothing more, nothing less. Rowan stepped off the porch. The snow crunched beneath his boots. Each step measured but no longer hesitant. The distance to the fire wasn't far. But it felt different. Each step carried weight, not from burden, from choice. Dylan handed him the cup without saying anything. Rowan took it. Warm, simple, real. Around them, people moved, talked, laughed quietly. Calvin stood near one of the lantern posts, his thick coat dusted with snow, speaking with Lena, who had her arms folded against the cold, but her posture relaxed. Mabel moved between groups, passing out food, her voice carrying warmth even in the cold night. Luke stood slightly apart, listening more than speaking, but present. All of them connected, not by plan, not by design, but by something that had grown slowly, piece by piece. Rowan stood there for a while, saying little. He didn't need to fill the silence. He had learned that long ago. But this silence, it wasn't empty. It was shared. Later, when the crowd began to thin and the fires burned lower, Rowan returned to the porch. The river reflected the last of the lantern light, the surface moving slowly beneath the cold. Ash followed. He sat beside Rowan again, this time facing outward. For a long moment, neither moved. The night settled around them. Cold, still. Complete, Rowan rested his forearms on the railing, his gaze drifting across the land. A year ago, he had stood in a church, listening to words that had reduced him to something small, something replaceable, something unnecessary. He had believed it, not because it was true, but because it had been repeated enough to feel real. Now, standing here, he saw the truth differently. He had not been removed. He had been redirected, given something he would not have taken if it had been handed to him, something he had to choose. Ash shifted beside him. Rowan glanced down. The dog's eyes met his, calm, certain. Ash lifted his paw, not quickly, not sharply. He brought it down, once, then again, and then a third time. 3 soft, measured taps against the wood. Rowan didn't react immediately. He just listened. Not to the sound, to what it had become. It wasn't a signal anymore. Not a warning, not a guide. It was something else now. Something shared. Rowan crouched down slowly, lowering himself to Ash's level. He placed a hand on the dog's head, fingers resting lightly against the thick fur between his ears. For a moment, he stayed there, then, very deliberately, he lifted his own hand and tapped. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound was quieter, less precise, but it carried. Ash didn't move, but his tail shifted once against the wooden boards. Rowan exhaled slowly. For the first time, he wasn't trying to understand what came next. He wasn't looking for direction. He wasn't waiting for something to reveal itself. He was here, exactly where he needed to be. The river moved. The forest stood. The lights faded slowly behind him. And Rowan Hale remained, not at the edge of something else, but at the center of something he had helped build. Sometimes, what feels like loss is not the end of your story. It is the quiet beginning of something greater that you cannot yet see. Rowan believed he had been forgotten, pushed aside, erased from a life he had given everything to. But in truth, God had been working in silence, preparing a path that required patience, faith, and the courage to keep walking even when nothing made sense. The door that closed on him was never meant to trap him. It was meant to guide him somewhere he truly belonged. In our own lives, we often face moments where everything seems unfair. People leave, opportunities disappear, and the future feels uncertain. But faith reminds us that God sees what we cannot. He is shaping outcomes beyond our understanding, placing people, moments, and even quiet signs along the way. Sometimes through something as simple and as powerful as a loyal companion who refuses to let us give up. So if you are going through a difficult time right now, hold on. What you think is a setback may actually be God's way of leading you toward a purpose greater than anything you planned for yourself. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who might need hope today. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from, and what part of this journey spoke to you the most. And don't forget to subscribe to Veteran Dog Stories, so we can continue bringing you stories of faith, resilience, and second chances. May God bless you, guide your path, protect your heart, and fill your life with peace, strength, and unexpected miracles.